It is more hits than misses as Governor Urjit Patel completes 2 years in office. Despite being a rather low-profile central banker, Patel has proved to be a hard nut to crack for both the government and Indian industry. On more than one occasion, he took on the centre head-on, be it tackling inflation or speaking openly against the dual control structure of state-owned banks. Patel came under intense scrutiny when he replaced renowned economist Raghuram Rajan after the Modi government announced demonetisation, but he shifted gears soon enough with the big crackdown on errant promoters. With 2 back-to-back rate hikes, Patel has also proved that he means business when it comes to inflation management. The hits and the misses in the last 2 years of Urjit Patel is our next topic of debate right here on the India Development Debate this evening. I'm Supriya Shrinate, and joining us on the show tonight, Maithili Bisnurmat, consulting editor ET Now, Hemendra Hazari, banking expert, and Somnath Mukherjee, managing partner, ASK Wealth Advisors. Thanks each one of you for being with us. And Maithili, I think it's only fair that I begin with you. Having been a central banker yourself, how do you believe Urjit Patel has fared as the 24th governor of the RBI in his first 2-year tenure? And in some sense, he has carried forward Raghuram Rajan's legacy, whether it was the NPA crackdown, whether it was the MPC and all of that. Did we see continuation at the helm of RBI?
Well, yes, we did see continuation in a large way, but I would, in fact, if you were to ask me to rate Urjit Patel's performance on a scale of 1 to 10, I would give him a 5 on 10. For the simple reason that in India, the Reserve Bank of India is a full-service central bank. So it has to look after not only monetary policy, but a whole host of other responsibilities, including paying debtor to the bank, to the government, supervision of banks, development role. So it has a whole host of other roles as well. So while the RBI under Urjit Patel in particular has done very well on inflation control, maybe being a little bit rigid and a little bit narrow in its focus on that 4% rather than 4% plus or minus, interpreting it as an inflexible target rather than a flexible target, but he has had, aided by luck, managed to control inflation. But in the other respects, particularly banking, in debt management, those are the areas where I think he has fallen short. So I would say yes, there's been continuum, but I think he needed to show much more flexibility than he has shown. He tends to come across as a very rigid, inflexible kind of governor, and I think part of the success of good governor is that they must know when to be firm and when to be flexible. Unfortunately, I think Urjit Patel has always come across as a very rigid, inflexible kind of central bank governor, and that I'm not sure is the kind of governor a country like India needs.
Okay. All right, we'll come to his flexibility or his inflexibility in just a while, but let's talk about the biggest event in Urjit Patel's tenure in the last 2 years. And Hemendra Hazari, that of course has been demonetisation. Has that been a big red on his report card? Whereas RBI governor, he came across as somebody who was pliable, and his institution came across as a mere mute spectator.
See, whatever he may achieve now, Urjit Patel will always be remembered for demonetisation and for the complete bungling that the Reserve Bank and the government did in both in conceiving this plan as well as implementing this plan. I don't think any central bank in the world has done such a self-inflicted measure, which has caused not only some millions of job losses, but about a 1% GDP loss as well. And mind you, this was done without any external crisis. Because sometimes, because of a balance of payment crisis, the central bank does take certain action, which leads to tremendous job losses. But here there was no such thing. So this was just a measure which the RBI, on record is the RBI which has recommended to the government. He should have put his foot down. And sadly, this is what he is going to be remembered for. And in my opinion, he will go down in RBI's history as its most inept governor for the role that they have played during demonetisation.
All right. So you were obviously unhappy with how the demonetisation debacle, if I may call it, was handled. But let me take it across to Mr. Mukherjee. And Mr. Mukherjee, has Governor Patel since then been able to resurrect himself and the autonomy of his institution? As head of MPC, where he has a veto, he has refused to give in on the rate cut clamour. Or are you going to say that, he's been spared of criticism on that count because the pressure doesn't come on him alone? It's now a committee that decides.
Yes and no, in the sense that there is a committee now, and it's not a single horse show anymore as far as setting off the policy rates are concerned. But the RBI governor obviously plays a very important role in deciding the stance of the central bank, of RBI, in terms of where the policy direction will be. So even as individual members have equal votes to decide on the policy rate stance, the governor does play an outsized role in shaping the narrative of the central bank. I am actually a little less concerned or a little less critical about the demonetization per se. I think there is far too much judgment being done far too soon on the impact of demonetization. I think there's been some really significant promises or significantly promising developments that have happened because of demonetization, some of which will play out in the years to come. And a lot of the criticism that both the RBI governor...
Mr. Mukherjee, give me a minute. Okay. Okay. No. Give me a minute. I'm not going to delve deep into this and discuss that. Maitri, I want to touch upon a subject very briefly with you, and I know it's a subject close to your heart, which is inflation reading. Inflation targeting began under Rajan, and Urjit Patel went on and followed that. But did the RBI under the governor read inflation wrong on many counts? Inflation, in fact, had underperformed to the RBI's own targets repeatedly. There was no rate cut that should have happened because of this wrong targeting. Do you blame the governor for getting the figure of inflation wrong?
The problem really, Supriya, is that inflation targeting is a very, very difficult exercise. So in all fairness, the RBI's inflation models clearly were wrong. So given the fact that we saw there was a continuous track record and the RBI is consistently overestimating inflation as per its models and is consistently finding that inflation actually came in as much less, the RBI should have done some kind of correction. I think there the Reserve Bank of India under Governor Urjit Patel clearly erred, and this was, I think, mainly because the governor has been very much an inflation hawk right from the very beginning, and he always interpreted that inflation target as a very rigid, inflexible target, rather than looking at it more holistically as a flexible inflation target, and also seeing what kind of damage could possibly be done to growth in the process of his excessive focus on inflation. So I think there, yes, the Reserve Bank of India under Governor Urjit Patel certainly did err, and today maybe we have paid the price for that excessive conservatism.
Okay, I know, Hemendra Hazare, you're not impressed with how demonetization panned out, but I must perhaps highlight what the green on his report card will be, and that is that he has presided over IBC implementation. How are you going to rate the performance of the central bank under him as India saw its first ever bankruptcy code roll out? This was really the big cleanup, was it not?
No, very clearly. No, I don't think in India we've had such a kind of a resolution for bad debt assets. But the point to note is, when you resolve an asset, we also like to see some type of significant recovery. Now, barring one or two corporate accounts, I really do not see any significant recovery coming from this IBC as yet. Now, secondly, is that the whole process of all these measures should actually try to improve the health of the banking system. The objective is for the banks to be healthy, for them to continue to grow their business, for them to expand. Now, what nobody realizes is that out of your 21 government banks, a very large number, about 11 or 12, are under the PCA. So, you're encouraging all these banks to do narrow banking. New customers are not coming in. Bank lending is suffering. The only thing which is growing is retail. Now, the whole objective of all this is to improve the health of your government banking sector. Sadly, exactly the opposite is happening, because the whole, everything he's being lauded for is that he's doing transparency, that all these bad debts are finally coming to the surface, which is indeed a noble objective. But the point is, it has to be correspondingly met by massive recapitalization, which is just not happening. And therefore, the banks, the government banks today are in very poor shape. The public is losing confidence because you come up with some various measures where you say, if they go down, the depositors will take the hit. So you have to have a corresponding plan to restore the confidence and to restore the growth potential of these banks, which I don't see Dr. Patel doing.
I want to really go across to a very controversial thing, perhaps in Okay, I want to go across to a more controversial subject in Dr. Tenure's, in Dr. Tenure, last year, 2 years of Dr. Tenure, and Mr. Mukherjee, has RBI, in some sense, he said, and I'm going to quote him here, he asked for greater role and authority in PSU banks in his famous speech in Gandhinagar, where he questioned the dual regulation of PSU banks by government, which restrains the RBI power. How did you read that statement of Governor Patel? Was he asking and asserting more authority? Was he telling the government, and was he calling the government's bluff? What was he actually doing?
No, I think there is far too much read between the lines on these things. There is a fundamental issue in the bank, in the way banks are regulated and structured in India. A very high percentage of the banking system, close to 65–70% of it, is in public sector hands, and that does lead to very obvious conflicts of interest situations vis-a-vis the banking regulator, because the central bank is also the banking regulator in India. So I don't read as much on the tea leaves about Dr. Patel's remarks on that. It's a structural issue with banks, and there are good reasons why the system is what it is. We have seen in the last 10–12 years, both globally and in India, that regardless of the ownership of banks, losses to depositors are finally taxpayer funded. So a very valid question can be asked, that if losses are social, why should profits be all private? And hence, what should be the structure of the banking system? It's not an easy question. I mean, banks, regulators across the world are trying to address that question. Stiffer capital norms under Basel III, a variety of tightening measures on both liquidity as well as capital are trying to address that question. In India, we already have the legacy of a very large state-owned banking sector, and hence we have to find and muddle through and find our own solutions. Therefore, I think it was more in the realm of throwing up ideas on what could be done and what could be explored, rather than anything more. At least I don't read too much between the lines on that in terms of asserting authority or asserting independence. I don't see it that way.
Give me a minute, because I want to talk about the other big thing, and I don't think he gets enough credit for this. And Maithili, you're someone who can look at it more critically. Has he shown the spine to take on top private bankers? I mean, these top private bankers were almost iconic. Shikhar Sharma has been nudged to step down. Rana Kapoor's extension hasn't quite come through. Has he done more than people perhaps give him credit for?
Well, I'm not so sure I agree with you on that, Supriya, because it took a very long time. As far as ICICI Bank was concerned, in fact, for a very long time, there was complete silence from RBI, Reserve Bank of India. And in fact, we had no word at all from Reserve Bank of India. Why is it that the Reserve Bank of India had never found this kind of conflict of interest in the course of its inspections? Likewise, even in the case of Yes Bank, as we are seeing right now, the Reserve Bank of India has just extended Rana Kapoor's tenure till further notice. Now, what does that mean? Either you say yes or you say no. You knew very well that his term was coming to an end. You knew exactly what his credibility or what his performance was like. So do you take a view, one view or the other? In fact, I would think the Reserve Bank has not performed particularly well vis-a-vis the private sector banks at all, where it claims it has enough powers. So I don't think I can give much credit to Reserve Bank over there also. And as far as the question of differential powers between public sector banks and private sector banks, I don't think that's quite borne out by facts, because the Reserve Bank of India's powers as a supervisor are exactly the same whether private or public. The difference is only because of dual ownership, and we have it on record from none less than a former central banker and a governor, Raghuram Rajan, that the RBI's powers are more than sufficient as far as supervision is concerned. So I really don't quite buy that. I think there were so many fingers being pointed at the Reserve Bank of India that there was a bit of an attempt to shift the blame and say that, look, we didn't have enough powers. My question is, has the RBI exercised even the powers that it has, even in the matter of private sector banks? I do not think so.
Right. Okay, Hemendra Hazari, Maithili is not quite impressed with what he did with the private bankers, and maybe his conspicuous silence on ICICI Bank and the controversy that brewed there perhaps is one of the reasons. But I want to move away from that. I want to move away from his treatment of public and private banks and talk about the government. After 2 years in office, Is he now more his own man than ever before? He has criticized palm loan waivers. He's refused to budge on inflation and rate cuts. He hasn't given in to the clamour. He's made MPC members refuse FinMin invites. He has stayed firm on PCA for weak banks, power NPAs, even though government wants a relook. Is he perhaps more in charge? Is he more authoritative? Is he more his own man today at the end of 2 years?
Appears so, but I think he's doing his job as any governor of the Reserve Bank of India should do. Normally, there's always been a friction between the Ministry of Finance, the government and the RBI. That's a historical relationship, and various governors in history have defended that. So this is part and parcel of being the governor of the Reserve Bank of India. Now, the way the media is making this out to be as if he's some great hero for standing up, according to me, he's just doing his job. If he had done his job in demonetization, you wouldn't have had this impact on it at all. So I think, this whole thing is being overhyped, and therefore, I think he's just doing what any governor of the Reserve Bank of India has done in the past as well.
Mr. Mukherjee, a quick question to you, and this has to be about, this perhaps has to be about being a banking regulator. And many people thought that the crackdown on NPA or the circulars that came in or the kind of penal provisions that were coming in some sense, the collateral damage was a credit freeze. In some sense, the collateral damage was that bankers lacked confidence to lend again. Will his big test now be to be able to reinstill faith and confidence, because banking is an act of faith. It is a risk that you take at the end of the day.
No, so two things. Number one, the point on a freeze on credit is grossly overblown and not backed by facts. So it is a fact that public sector banks did not have the capacity, the balance sheet capacity to lend, and therefore in the last few years a lot of the public sector bank lending has declined, and because they have such outsized market share, the overall bank lending piece has declined. But that doesn't mean that there was no alternative sources of capital in the economy to fund growth as it was required. Whether it's NBFCs, whether it is alternative investment funds, mutual funds, there's been a very large expansion of alternative sources of risk capital that replaced bank funding that vacated the space. So number one, there was no credit freeze as a result of the actions taken. In any banking crisis, any bad loans crisis over the years in history, there are only 3 steps to resolution. One, recognition of the quantum of the problem. Second, you deal with the problem by writing off or resolving the bad assets. And third, you get the capital. Right. Now, RBI and the government together essentially followed the same playbook. So I don't see that to be a big challenge. You can argue on whether they've moved fast enough or not, but that apart,
no, my question really was,
I don't see a problem of credit freeze.
Okay. All right. Okay, there is no problem of credit freeze is what you're saying. I wonder if bankers are speaking the same language. But 2 quick last questions, and Hemendra Hazare, I'm going to start with this one with you. His silence has been very, very conspicuous. And people believe his silence is more eloquent than sometimes what he says. In some sense, do you believe in the next few years that he's going to be in office or whatever terms left for him, I think the next 1 year, does he need to speak a lot more to economic stakeholders, to markets? Because people guess, there's a lot of guesswork that's on with what Governor Patel is actually thinking.
It appears that his very nature is not to be very articulate, because even as Deputy Governor, he did not speak too much. So therefore, to now expect that he is going to be more articulate, comment on many matters. You have seen that in demonetization, he did not speak. In Punjab National Bank fiasco, he did not speak. In ICICI Bank, Chanda Kochhar's matter, he did not speak. Now, these are very critical moments when you expect the Governor of the Reserve Bank of India to come forth and, restore some confidence to the public. But in such instances, when he did not speak at all, I think it's extremely unlikely that he is going to become, extremely articulate now in the public domain. So I really don't see him becoming that articulate. Even if you see his press conference, they're very short and he takes very few questions. So it's his very nature as an individual that
Trust
he is
me.
not such an outspoken person.
Right. I agree with you. You know, I've been to his press conferences and very seldom does one get a chance to ask questions. If Governor Patel is watching this one, you need to talk a lot more and comply with some of my pending interview requests. But Maithili, very quickly, let you have the last word. In some sense, however, has he been judged unfairly because of who his predecessor was? A very articulate, a very flamboyant, a man who was making headlines every day, Raghuram Rajan.
Well, yes, I do agree that Raghuram Rajan was the darling of the media particularly, and Urjit Patel's very reticence does not endear him to the media. But I must add that even though he has only a year left, it's still not too late to change, Supriya, for the simple reason that it's very important the central bank governor learns to communicate. By nature, he may not be a very communicative person, but when you are put in a particular position, you know what comes with the turf. You must learn to speak out, particularly when there are situations where it requires the central bank governor to speak out. He must put aside his personal reticence and come out and speak. And it's not just the governor himself. I think the general message in the Reserve Bank of India, even the deputy governors, speak much less than under his predecessors. So this is clearly not a very good thing. You do need to have somebody who shows that not only is he in command, but he also appears to be in command and sends out that message of confidence. At times like this, particularly when the rupee is under pressure, it would be so good if you had the central bank governor come out and send a word of reassurance. And I think this is something where the Governor Patel really needs to work on. It's not difficult, he needs to do it.
Okay, on that note, thank you very, very much, all three of you, for being with us in this edition of the India Development Debate. 2 years into office, Governor Patel has some hits and some misses. The big red on his report card will be demonetisation. That made him appear pliable, but his recent decisions to take on the government, whether it's on the prompt corrective action or power NPA or not relenting to the clamour for rate cut, has perhaps resurrected him and his institution of late. Governor Patel, of course, will be judged by how much he achieves as far as resolution of the bad debt is concerned. He's presiding over the biggest cleanup in Indian economy. Where will that lead us is how Governor Patel will finally be judged. Thank you very much for being with us on this edition of the India Development Debate. Up next is Top 10 at 10.